AM 1380, The Answer.
The information you obtain from this show is not, nor is it intended to be, legal advice. You should consult an attorney for advice regarding your individual situation. We invite you to contact us and welcome your calls, letters, and emails. Contacting us does not create an attorney-client relationship.
Stand by, stand by.
Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to the Saturday HOA Brunch, presented by Angius&Terry, LLP. Please sit back, relax, and join Brad Epstein and Jonathan Broderick for an hour of entertaining information about HOAs and HOA law.
You're on.
Good morning, Sacramento. It is October 10th, 2015. Beautiful day in Sacramento, and the Saturday HOA Brunch is back. Right, Epstein?
That's right. So good morning. Good morning, Viana. Good morning, Jonathan. Good morning,
Hello,
Mr.
everyone.
Browning. Bob, good morning.
Good morning. Thanks for having me back.
Yeah, it's great. We've got Bob Browning in studio, owner of Browning Reserve Group, and we've got an interesting topic today, and that is ham radio. Right, Bob?
Yes, sir. We're going to be talking ham, amateur radio, and the effects of some federal legislation that was introduced recently.
And that could have an effect on community associations.
Planned communities throughout the country could be affected, yes.
That's right. So this is a Saturday HOA Brunch. We hope you're having some brunch. Listening to us, we're Angius&Terry law firm representing community associations. We want you to join in the conversation today. Viana, how can they reach us? What's the way to reach us down here at the radio station?
So we want to hear from our callers. You can call us at 888-923-1380. And today's topic is so interesting. Maybe you want to call us and let us know what's going on in your associations in regards to amateur radio. And we'll answer your questions. You can also follow us on Twitter and Facebook. It's the Saturday HOA Brunch.
Hey, I thought of something. So we've talked about a lot of different subjects: banking, modern media, internal dispute resolution, all kinds of different things concerning community associations. Maybe our listeners can let us know what they want us to talk about next time. Our list is really long with community associations, right, Bob? We can talk about so many different aspects of community association law and management and legislation. And so it would be neat to hear what our listeners thought we should talk about next.
That is a good idea. Now, Bob, we've, of course, got to give a shout-out to your team, right? Because they're probably one of your biggest assets being successful in community association industry, right? So tell us a little bit about your team and the Browning Reserve Group.
Yeah, well, we formed the Browning Reserve Group on April Fool's Day, 1999. We're the only preparers of reserve studies in the Sacramento region proper that do that type of work year-round. And the interesting thing is most of my employees are hams or amateur radio operators. I found most of them through my work with the Sheriff's Department here in Sacramento County. Terry Ott, our lead site inspector for reserve studies, was the captain for the local volunteer search and rescue for the Sheriff's Department. His dog, Sela, who is often in our office, has several finds in finding lost persons out in the community. Brenda Griffin is also a ham, and she worked recently with the Sheriff's Department in search and rescue. And Mike McDermott, operations manager, is a ham and has been on the board of our local ham club for many years. His call sign's KF6RUQ.
Good old McDermott. I like McDermott.
Yeah, great guy. Yeah, so have to ask this. So why did you form your company, BRG, Browning Reserve Group, on April 1st? Was it just coincidence, or was it intended?
Got fired the day before from my old job.
Exciting. That's cool. All right. So, Viana, tell us a little bit about, the legislation, right? What are we going to talk about?
Well, I wanted Bob to tell us about the legislation because this is actually really interesting. It's federal legislation, and it's in regards to amateur radio communications. So, Bob, what is that about?
Well, there's H.R. 1301 and Senate Bill 1685 in the current Congress directs the Federal Communication, otherwise known as the FCC, to amend regulations concerning the height and dimensions of station antenna structures to prohibit a private land use restriction, known as CCNRs, from applying to amateur radio service communications, if that communication precludes communications by the amateur. Mm-hmm. So that's a lot of legalese that we think says any restriction that precludes a ham radio operator or an amateur radio federal licensee from being able to operate their equipment at their residence, that restriction would not be effective at that community.
Okay, so this is federal legislation. This is not regulations by the federal government. This is actually in the House of Representatives and the Senate. So do you know, I see that there's two numbers there. So there's 1301 and 1685. So is it now at the point where you have two competing bills by the House of Representatives and the Senate, or are they aligned?
They're aligned. They're actually identical. There's been legislation like this in the Congress probably for well over 10 years. And the Community Associations Institute, known as CAI, has been following the bills, and I've been working with them that whole time. The bills never really had legs or juice. They never really were going to go anywhere. But more recently, these two bills have together over 100 co-sponsors. And so there is a real chance that
100 co-sponsors.
100 co-sponsors.
What are some of the who are some of the co-sponsors?
I don't have the list in front of me, but it's a broad representation around the country, including most recently the House member from the state of Connecticut, where the American Radio Relay League resides, and that's the organization that lobbies on behalf of amateur radio operators around the country. They do a good job regulating, enforcing the FCC regulations, provide testing and licensing support for the FCC, so the federal government doesn't have to spend a lot of resources in that regard.
Well, let's take a step back real quick. We've got this term ham. When I think of hams, I think of the writer that tried to trash the common interest development industry in the Sacramento Bee a few weeks ago. Ham, that jumps in my head. But what is the acronym, or what is the definition of ham?
Well, you know what's interesting, Jonathan, is I never really knew what ham meant until I started researching this bill late last year. When I was taking courses on ham radios and studying for my license, no one could ever really tell me where the term came from. Recently, the ARRL, the American Radio Relay League, says that the ham term came from the early days of radio when many of the amateur radio stations were very powerful. So when I say radio station, I don't mean a radio station like we're sitting in here this morning. I mean, you have a desktop radio at your house hooked to an antenna in your yard, and you're talking to a friend or neighbor, next door or maybe halfway around the world. Well, that first equipment was very powerful and not tuned very well in some cases, and it could provide interference into unintended communication devices like a neighbor's telephone, stereo, maybe their car stereo speakers.
Oops.
You remember in the 70s when CBs, the truckers had the very powerful CB radios, and there was movies about it, and when they were talking on the radio, it came out of every car stereo within like a quarter mile.
Yeah, so you could just listen in on a communication between maybe someone in their backyard and
probably someone you didn't want to. But
yeah.
And so that doesn't happen that much these days. However, these days there's a proliferation of cheap electronics in all of our homes, from stereo speakers to touch sensor lights. And when some hams operate like my neighbor does, who's not a very good ham steward, he turns on my lights and I can hear him through my stereo, even today.
So, Bob, what is amateur radio? What is this ham radio hobby? What do people do? What is the hobby about?
Yeah, it's a way for people around the world to talk to each other using electronic radios. Think of walkie-talkies. Think of transceivers or radios that would sit on your desk the size of maybe a stereo amplifier. And with that radio and some type of antenna, you're able to communicate with other people for social reasons, for the public interest, to work when there's natural disasters, to provide communication support to your local community. It's basically a way for people to, what we call rag, chew, or talk while you commute, while you're at work, while you're at home, and to be able to talk without cell phones or the computer or any other mode.
Sure, it's being civic minded. In addition, we're prepared to help in a national disaster for communication and to assist. Right, we talked about for the emergency services in the event that there is a big disaster. In addition to just having fun with this, right?
Yeah, hams are invaluable in assisting FEMA, the Red Cross, Salvation Army, a lot of agencies around the country.
Local law enforcement, things of that
definitely,
nature.
Yes.
Great. Hey, so when we get back from the break, we are going to continue our discussion about ham radio. Right, Epstein?
That's right.
Having trouble understanding your community association's reserve study? Does your HOA's reserve study seem to be written in a strange language? Hi, I'm Robert Browning, owner of the Browning Reserve Group. At the Browning Reserve Group, we have been providing easy-to-understand reserve studies since 1999. We actually listen to our communities and help them plan for the future. Find us online at browningrg.com. That's browningrg.com, or toll free at 877-708-0600. That's 877-708-0600. Clarity from complexity, the Browning Reserve Group.
If your community association has a good relationship with their current management company, you can stop listening. However, if you are struggling with your current service provider, we'd love to talk with you to see if Omni Community Management would be a good fit. Transparency, education, communication, and trust are just 4 of the qualities that set Omni apart. This is Rolf Crocker, CEO of Omni. Call us at 916-965-8964. That's 916-965-8964. Online at omni-mgt.com. That's omni-mgt.com. Omni Community Management, your friend in the community association management industry for over 20 years.
Have you ever heard of the saying, a person's home is their castle? Of course you have. But sometimes a construction defect can turn your castle into a catastrophe. If this happens to you, you need proper and professional representation. You need Angius&Terry, LLP. For over 30 years, the attorneys at Angius&Terry have been effectively serving homeowners and community associations, recovering more than $500 million on behalf of their clients. Angius&Terry strives to ensure that your construction defect claims are prosecuted in an aggressive and cost-effective manner. Angius&Terry will also continue to work with homeowners and community associations after the construction defect claims are concluded to make sure that the money received from builders is spent wisely and that your interests are protected during the repair process. Don't let a construction defect turn your castle into a catastrophe. Call Angius&Terry LLP today at 916-567-1400. That's 916-567-1400. Online at angius-terry.com. Angius&Terry LLP.
This is AM 1380. The Answer.
You're listening to the Saturday HOA Brunch presented by Angius&Terry LLP. And now your hosts Brad Epstein and Jonathan Broderick on AM 1380 The Answer.
Hey, welcome back. 917, the Saturday HOA Brunch. Real quick, I want to get this shout out to my grandmother. She's turning 79 years old today. Pretty exciting stuff. So I imagine she's going to go for a walk and maybe hit the Indian Casino and just hang out and relax. So happy birthday, Grandma. We've got
Happy birthday.
We've got Bob Browning in studio, Viana Barbu, Brad Epstein, and we are discussing ham radio legislation and the impact on community associations. Right, Bob?
Yeah, we are, Jonathan. Again, thank you for having us in here today. In the Congress are 2 bills, H.R. 1301 in the House, and in the Senate, Senate Bill 1685. Federal legislation this time. Normally you talk state legislation here on the brunch, but this week we're talking federal legislation and the impact it might have on community associations. If the 2 bills were passed or combined into one and passed, it will restrict community associations' ability to enforce their CC&Rs related to amateur radio or ham radio equipment within their communities.
Yeah, so similar to that is the satellite dish law, right? Mm-hmm. And the satellite dish law, and I think a lot of us in community associations are very familiar with that. It was a really big deal. It came about in 1996, and it was slightly amended thereafter. And this is for the satellite dishes. The satellite dish companies have a really strong lobby. Mm-hmm. And there was first a state law, California state law, but that's been superseded by the federal law and the satellite dish law, and that's actually not a statute legislation. It's actually a federal regulation. So a little bit different. But anyway, the satellite dish law, it says basically that community associations can't prevent an individual owner from installing satellite dishes on their separate interests, which would be the lot, the exclusive use common area in a condominium, right? We learned about that, right, Jonathan?
Oh, absolutely.
Right, so the balconies, and as long as the satellite dish is less than a meter, and actually most of the satellite dishes now are, I think they're 18 inches. We're talking about
the diameter isn't huge. I remember my grandparents had one. They put in, they got the satellite dish on their property in Shingle Springs. I went out there and I thought I was, walking up to a NASA facility. This dish was probably...
What was the diameter?
15 feet.
15 feet.
It was huge. It
Wow.
was 8 feet tall, and it pointed up at the sky, and it was crazy.
Okay, I got to ask, why did they have that?
Because it was satellite dish technology in the late 80s, early 90s. It was huge. The tower was huge.
They couldn't get cable TV out there.
Yep, out in Shingle Springs.
Okay.
And I'm so seriously, this thing was literally probably 15 feet in diameter, and it stood about probably 6 or 7 feet tall, and it was just out in the open area of their acreage in Shingle Springs.
Yeah, so I guess the question, Jonathan, is so can a community association prevent an owner from installing one of those size dishes on their balcony?
Absolutely. But if they're dealing with...
It's just too big, right? It's a 3 feet limit.
But if they're dealing with AT&T or Comcast or any of the dish installation companies, they should probably consult with who? Morgan Fussell, right? Broadband agreements?
Absolutely. Morgan Fussell broadband agreements.
Well, Bob, what I want to know is what is an amateur radio station composed of? How does it compare to this 15-foot antenna type installation?
Very briefly, and I could go on all day talking about what a typical amateur radio station is, but it generally, for purposes of our conversation today, would be, say, a radio the size of a stereo amplifier you may have at your home, a stereo receiver. That might have ancillary equipment with it, but that would be on your desktop in your office at home or living room, wherever you'd like to put it. But that would have to be connected using what we call a feed line, which is a heavy-duty length of wire that connects to an antenna, usually outdoors. And so depending on the type of radio you have, you'll need a complementary antenna that may need to be up on a mast or a tower. And this legislation would not allow community associations to regulate the size or type of that tower. Now, the regulation, if passed, does say that there has to be a reasonable accommodation, but we all know what reasonable accommodation has usually meant when it comes to community association. It means the person needs to be able to communicate and talk, and if they can't do that, then the restriction would be null and void. So basically a ham radio, that would be one typical ham radio station where you have a set-top radio with a microphone and a headset connected to an antenna outside. That could be anything from an old-fashioned TV antenna that a lot of our grandmas had on their house with a rotor that they could twist it to Walnut Grove to get the local TV channels or the Bay Area, or to pick up the Raiders or San Francisco 49ers when they had the blackout rule back in the day. We'd point our TV antennas to Chico, but to be able to get the big game. But two ham radio stations talking could be two radios the size of a cell phone.
Really?
And in that case, no problem with this bill and community associations. Through digital communications now, hams can talk around the world by what we have as a network of repeaters, where you have a small radio the size of a cell phone. From that, you can talk to a antenna that's up on a mountaintop, maybe 10 or 15 miles away. Through that mountaintop, that antenna is hooked to the internet, goes around the world, maybe to Sydney, Australia, to a mountaintop there where somebody locally in Sydney could talk to you in real time and for free. Around the clock.
You kind of brushed on in the fact of when we've had a tragedy like maybe Hurricane Katrina, or we've had the unfortunate events of like September 11th, or any other natural disaster. This can actually be utilized as an asset for communication, right?
Very much so. After 9/11, hams were invaluable in helping at Ground Zero provide communications traffic both for the local government and then later on for health and welfare traffic. So people working at Ground Zero or people that were still looking for loved ones could communicate around the world and have instant communications anywhere. Katrina, hams were invaluable with helping with the disaster there and the cleanup afterwards. So ham radio operators provide a very important service. The challenge we have with this legislation is it's saying that that's only can happen in a residence, and that hams need towers and masts in their backyards in order to be useful, and that's not the case at all.
So, Bob, have there been any discussions with community associations about the use of ham radios with either the owners or the associations? What is the current thought on that?
CAI, the Community Association Institute, has done polling through the Zogby organization. And really, we found that 95% of respondents believe that their architectural covenants preserve and protect their property values and the local housing market. So they're for these restricted covenants. And for many of them, that's why they moved into a community association. 91% of the Zogby survey indicated that their community has not denied a request for a ham radio antenna. So there are many community associations out there that have their own ham radio clubs and encourage the ham radio hobby, and we fully support that. I was at a community association in Henderson, Nevada a few weeks ago. They had a ham radio license class in their clubhouse, the same chairs we were sitting in a few hours before, and that board of directors had found that the hobby was important enough to support a ham club at that community association.
How many members in the ham club? Just curious.
I think they said they had about 30.
Wow, 30 members involved. What do you think, Brad? Have you seen, I mean, I know that like Sun City, Lincoln Hills, they have 700 clubs or some, just large number.
Oh, I bet they have a ham radio club as well.
I mean, with membership or being part of that group, 30, that's a good portion of the community coming out and getting involved, right? In something?
Yeah, and can you imagine if a disaster were to strike again? Community associations could be very helpful with their ham clubs to get the word out, to let their members maybe have the best way to communicate with responders or other family members where the disaster is happening. Community associations could be the answer with those types of things, but this legislation isn't the answer to do it.
So I'm curious about that, Bob. Your opinion is that we don't really, amateur radio operators don't really need this legislation. Why is that?
Ham radio operators can already apply to their boards of directors for to install any type of ham radio or antenna as it is right now. And our survey has showed that 81% of the respondents at Zogby survey said their community has never relied on a local ham radio operator in the event of a disaster. So it seems to be fixing a problem that doesn't exist. By the ARL's own estimate, there's only 700,000 hams in the United States. Many of those are not active, and many more don't work in the public agency arena where they're helpful during an emergency. So we're talking at the most maybe a few thousand people. And do we really need federal legislation to impact all community associations when it's really a hobby just for a few hundred or a few thousand?
Okay, so back to the word hobby. What kind of cost out of pocket to start this hobby are you looking at? So we've got some community association board members listening right now, and they go, oh my gosh, El Nino is on the horizon, right? At least that's what the news keeps telling us. And well, we live in West Sacramento, and there's all these levees out here and bodies of water. What's it going to cost out of pocket for them to acquire equipment to get into ham radio?
Well, the good thing about the hobby is these days it's very inexpensive to start in the hobby. For well under $1,000, you can buy a radio that would allow you to transmit around the country. Antennas can be as inexpensive as a length of wire you string up, called a dipole antenna. So less than $1,000, Jonathan, and you're set up in the hobby in a basic way.
And I can talk to somebody up in space, right, or bounce something.
Yeah,
what
what's
were you
that
saying?
about
What's
bouncing
that
off the
about?
moon?
Ham radio operators are very ingenious, and ham radio operators can bounce radio signals off the moon. It's called EME communication. So if I wanted to talk to somebody in New York, I could bounce a signal off the moon here from Sacramento using just a few watts and a radio the size of my palm of my hand. Ham radio operators can transmit television signals through the radio airwaves and been able to do that for decades. Ham radio operators even have their own satellites.
And why would you do that? Why would you do the television?
Oh, think of surveillance during a public event or a crisis. You could put a ham radio TV camera, on a balloon or a drone and be able to see the video signals.
Awesome. Hey, when we get back from the break, we've got a caller with a question for ham radio, I guess, guru Bob Browning from the Browning Reserve Group. We'll be back.
Don't go away.
More at Meta.
Now at Meta Subaru and MetaSubaru.com.
More selection.
The best in the Sacramento area.
More savings.
They've got the best deals around.
More satisfaction.
An A-plus experience. Only Meta Subaru includes your first-year scheduled maintenance plus 0% financing. See your savings instantly at MetaSubaru.com.
The best decision I ever made was to shop at Meta.
More selection. More savings. More satisfaction.
Get more now at Meta Subaru.
Did you see the story about the Homeowners Association? I wonder what their residents think.
I don't know, but I love my condominium association. The place looks great and is well managed, and our property values are increasing.
Well, that's a good thing.
Community Associations Institute, CAI, has helped us build a great community. They have tools for safeguarding our investment, including education for our board and professional training for our manager. Just visit CAI at responsiblecommunities.com.
Okay, responsiblecommunities.com.
Hi, this is Rick Russo, owner of Russo Insurance Agency and Financial Services. We proudly serve Granite Bay, Roseville, Rockland, Sacramento, Lake Tahoe, and the surrounding areas. At Russo Insurance Agency, we like to say, get to know us before you need us. Our insurance agency is built on relationships and trust. If you want to be certain that your most valuable assets are insured correctly, allow us to give you more than just a 15-minute quote. For all your commercial, home, auto, and life insurance needs, call us today at 916-791-1901. That's 916-791-1901 or online at rickrussoinsurance.com. That's rickrussoinsurance.com. Thank you.
This is AM 1380, The Answer.
You're listening to the Saturday HOA Brunch presented by Angius&Terry, LLP. And now your hosts, Brad Epstein and Jonathan Broderick on AM 1380, The Answer.
9:31, back in a radio studio talking about amateur ham radio legislation and some of the different components of maybe inheriting this as a hobby. But we have a caller, a great fan of the show, one of our favorite listeners, one of our favorite community managers. Deanna, how are you doing this morning?
Good morning, everyone. Doing great. How about you guys?
Good.
And gal. Sorry, Deanna.
So you have a question, right, for Bob?
Yeah, Bob, I think I heard this correctly, that they're, with this new bill, they're going to allow these ham stations. I manage condominiums, which are, tri-level to, two-story. So I was wondering how that would affect condominiums.
I think I'll leave that to Brad. I don't think the impact would be great, but he is the lawyer here. Brad?
Okay, so let's talk about this for a minute. So thank you, Deanna, and great manager. Yeah, I understand she manages a lot of condominiums, and condominiums are different from your other style of association, right? We have condominiums on the one hand, we have planned unit developments on the other hand, which could be townhomes, attached homes, or detached homes. But the difference is that when you own a condominium, you just own a cube of space, right? From the surfaces of the walls, floors, right, Deanna?
Airspace.
Yeah, the airspace, right? And also, Deanna, right, the balconies. Right?
Yep.
So that is the exclusive use common area of the individual owner. So, again, this legislation is intended to prohibit associations from putting on restrictions that prevent basically the use of ham radio.
On their property.
On their property. So that's the key, right, guys?
Mm-hmm.
So the key is that you could put anything you want in your unit, easy, right? But the trick issue, and this is the same thing with satellite dishes, is, well, what about putting the ham radio equipment, the antenna, on your balcony?
Right. And that would be the challenge in the exclusive use common area. There could be a challenge that they'd have the right to put it on their private balcony, Deanna.
Well, what about a board of directors decides that they want to start a ham radio committee or club, and they just said, "Hey, well, we're responsible for the clubhouse. We're going to put the antenna on the roof." Don't you think that would be
on the roof of the clubhouse?
On the roof of the clubhouse.
Oh, okay. So how about that, Bob? So is that?
Yeah, I have an antenna on my one of my clubhouses when they were doing, the antennas for the TV. So anyone could hook up in the community to that one antenna.
A lot of community associations, and Deanna, a lot of community associations have an antenna mast already, either for their old-fashioned TV antenna before cable came into being, or for their private radio system for their maintenance folks. And so it would be quite feasible to add a ham radio antenna to there with no harm. I would think the board would have to follow their own restrictions.
Well, so is that feasible? So I'm a homeowner. I have a condominium. I'm in my unit there, and I realize that there is this antenna on the clubhouse.
Mm-hmm.
Could I physically connect up to that, Bob, from my condominium unit?
Technically, you might be able to, and there's ways to do it wirelessly. You'd be on the leading edge of hams at that point. But
who wouldn't want to be on the leading edge of
I'd consider
hams?
myself a honey-baked ham.
No, I don't want you to, no thanks.
Yeah, but you wouldn't be able to
She
have...
says no thanks.
Yeah, you wouldn't be able to have every member of the association hooked to one antenna and think they could all use it when they wanted, like a reverse cable system. That would not work.
Yeah, I think the rub is just like Deanna with satellite dishes, right? So, first of all, this was a big deal. A lot of boards and homeowners did not want all these mushrooms, right? The satellite dishes popping up throughout their development. And the idea was that we couldn't, it was a big fight, and it's not so much a fight anymore, but you could put the satellite dishes on your balcony as long as they didn't extend over the common area. So the details of this law, it does it. Do you know? I don't know whether it addresses the fact that an antenna. So antenna can be mounted, say, on a balcony, right?
Yeah,
Right.
The law doesn't get into the technical dimensions of an antenna or what would be allowed. It just talks about if there's a covenant that would restrict it or not reasonably allow it, that would be null and void. But if you recall with the satellite dish issue back after 1996, some of those issues weren't even the antenna or the see-it. It was because the homeowners were screwing the mast bracket into the siding and causing damage, and still do, and dry rot, and then water gets in, and then they move, and it's still there.
Or on the roof.
Yeah, or on the roof. They put a hole in the roof to mount their satellite dish. So
Welcome to my world, Bob.
the world of a community association manager trying to keep peace at all times.
Always. Well, thank you, guys. Thanks, Bob. Do
Thank
a great
you.
job. Love the show, everyone.
Thank you, Deanna. Thanks for calling in. So, speculation, make an estimation here, Bob. Is this law going? Is this bill going to pass into law? Is there any opposition to it?
the only opposition we've seen so far is from CAI, the Community Associations Institute. And it's because CAI is a strong believer that private contracts, which CC&Rs really are, should not be fooled with. And the FCC has precedence for this, that in all prior rulings when the ham radio hobby has tried to circumvent CC&Rs, the FCC has held every time that private covenants are private contracts and that the FCC has no business putting their nose into a private contract. That's why the ARRL, the ham radio lobby, is trying to circumvent the FCC and force them to now get in the middle of private contracts.
Okay, so till now, well, currently and previously, the FCC has said we're not going to take any steps to try and take any actions so that owners can use ham or not use ham in community associations because we're going to consider the CC&Rs, right? The CC&Rs.
Yeah, contract.
Right, a contract. So we're not going to mess with that until now we have proposed legislation that would then give the FCC the ability to go ahead and take on complaints that say a ham radio operator, a condominium owner, they went to their board of directors. They said, I want to put on this antenna, or they just go ahead and they put on the antenna on their balcony. And then the board of directors says no. They call them to a hearing. They impose special individual assessments against them and fines and whatnot, take away their rights to go to the swimming pool. That homeowner then, if this bill passes into law, will be able to arguably go to the FCC and make a complaint. And the FCC does it actually have enforcement, or is it just a basic prohibition at this time?
It's just a basic prohibition. And the language in the bill is very short. It's only 3 small paragraphs, less than half of a page of text. If any of you want to download HR 1301. But pretty much it just says that within 120 days after passage of the bill, that the FCC is directed by Congress to change the rules regulating ham radio to restrict community associations from accommodations by amateurs. So
yeah, I'm looking at the law right now. Very, very short. Yeah,
brief.
Yeah, it does. It's a prohibition. Preclude communication, fails to reasonably accommodate such communication, does not constitute the minimum practicable restriction on such communication. And so what an owner would do is they would then, if they have a dispute, go to IDR and ADR, right, Jonathan?
Sounds like a plan, yeah, if that's what you say, Suit. All right, we're going to go to break. When we come back from the break, Bob Browning continues to join us in studio. The rambunctious Romanian Biana Barbu is here, along with Counselor Brad Epstein. We'll be back shortly.
Ready for a talk show that's fast-paced, informative, provocative, and fun? Tune in Saturday mornings at 9 for the Saturday HOA Brunch, presented by Angius&Terry, LLP, with your host, Attorney Brad Epstein, a seasoned veteran specializing in community association law, including construction defect. His firm has recovered more than $500 million for their clients. No fluff here. It's the Saturday HOA Brunch, presented by Angius&Terry, LLP, hosted by Attorney Brad Epstein and his co-host, Jonathan Broderick. Saturdays at 9 on AM 1380, The Answer.
Hi, I'm Morgan Fussell. My company, Broadband Agreements, negotiates cable television and broadband right of entry, access, and compensation agreements for your communities. At Broadband Agreements, we offer a free review of all agreements with a signed letter of authorization. Broadband Agreements will improve your community's income and/or savings, or you don't pay us a dime. Visit us at broadbandagreements.com. That's broadbandagreements.com. Or call me, Morgan Fussell, directly at 916-939-5026. That's 916-939-5026. Broadband Agreements online at broadbandagreements.com or 916-939-5026.
The challenges presented by today's economy and rebounding housing market is forcing many homeowners association boards of directors to operate their HOAs more like a business. It's a balancing act of trying to stay solvent and still provide homeowners with quality amenities and services. One of the main challenges HOA boards are facing is attempting to recover unpaid HOA fees owed by delinquent homeowners. Collection efforts are often very time-consuming. If you want to get the HOA fees collection monkey off of your back, call ATC Assessment Collection Group. ATC is an attorney-supervised collection company providing collection and foreclosure services to HOAs in both California and Nevada's most recognizable communities. Get back to what you actually volunteered to do as an HOA board member. Effectively oversee your community. Call ATC today at 916-641-1410. That's 916-641-1410. Online at atcacg.com. That's atcacg.com. ATC Assessment Collection Group. Have you ever heard of the saying, a person's home is their castle? Of course you have. But sometimes a construction defect can turn your castle into a catastrophe. If this happens to you, you need proper and professional representation. You need Angius&Terry, LLP. For over 30 years, the attorneys at Angius&Terry have been effectively serving homeowners and community associations, recovering more than $500 million on behalf of their clients. Angius&Terry strives to ensure that your construction defect claims are prosecuted in an aggressive and cost-effective manner. Angius&Terry will also continue to work with homeowners and community associations after the construction defect claims are concluded to make sure that the money received from builders is spent wisely and that your interests are protected during the repair process. Don't let a construction defect turn your castle into a catastrophe. Call Angius&Terry, LLP today at 916-567-1400. That's 916-567-1400. Online at angius-terry.com. Angius&Terry, LLP.
Having trouble understanding your community association's reserve study? Does your HOA's reserve study seem to be written in a strange language? Hi, I'm Robert Browning, owner of the Browning Reserve Group. At the Browning Reserve Group, we have been providing easy-to-understand reserve studies since 1999. We actually listen to our communities and help them plan for the future. Find us online at browningrg.com. That's browningrg.com, or toll free at 877-708-0600. That's 877-708-0600. Clarity from complexity, the Browning Reserve Group.
News, opinion, insight. AM 1380. The Answer.
You're listening to the Saturday HOA Brunch presented by Angius&Terry, LLP. And now your hosts, Brad Epstein and Jonathan Broderick on AM 1380, The Answer.
Hey, 9:45, Saturday HOA Brunch, coming to you live from the beautiful studios here.
Look at the weather, you guys.
Oh, man. You forgot to get the forecast
balmy.
out. It's going to be maybe a balmy fall day. I wonder when the seasons are going to change when we look out from the studio. So Bob Browning's here with us, owner of the Browning Reserve Group. You brought up a great point. A lot of community associations in the Sacramento area still lack using the services of a great company like Bob Browning, right? With reserve studies, it's budget season. You're going crazy right now.
Well, I'm shocked that could be the case, but certainly, and not just using our firm, but any reserve study firm.
No kidding.
Right now, we're all so busy working on budgets. I'm sure Deanna probably called in from the office while she's working on her budgets. In fact, I'm afraid the clients may call me here that I haven't returned their calls in the last few days.
Well, what's the connection between the reserves and a community association's budget, Bob?
Well, the overall budget would include operational and reserve expenses, capital large expenses. The reserve studies that are required under the Davis-Sterling Act are just dealing with the large capital reserve type expenses like road sealing, roof replacement, painting of the homes, swimming pool resurfacing. So in order for all associations who have reserves to be in compliance with the Davis-Sterling Act, and in order for them to be able to raise assessments from one year to the next, every association or most associations have to do a budget packet, which includes a reserve study summary at least. So it's very important.
I mean, you document and lay out a plan of maintenance responsibilities, right, to take place for funding in the future.
It's a guide, right?
Yep.
It's a roadmap.
Wait, what do you say, Bob? You say, what's the reason why you have to do a reserve study? And I can see you up on the stage at a presentation, and you say, because it's the law.
It's the law. Two reasons. It's the law, and it makes good business sense.
It does.
And the board's fiduciary duty, in our mind, can only be achieved properly by hiring a arm's length reserve professional to do their study.
Right, and you don't just do reserves for Sacramento associations.
No, we go down to Baja, California, Texas.
Whenever you can.
You have an office up in the Northwest too, correct?
Yeah, in Idaho.
Idaho.
We certainly do.
It does a lot of potato reserves, right?
I love Idaho.
Yeah, so... But in Nevada, I mean, even high-rise, right? We had another PCAM. You're a PCAM, which was equivalent to the master's degree in community.
What's a PCAM?
Right? PCAM is...
Yeah, what's a PCAM,
Nick
Jonathan?
Berg said
Jonathan,
that it was
what's a PCAM?
a professional credential through the Community Associations Institute that would be equivalent to possibly a master's degree from
I don't know if I go that far, but
he said it's a master's degree of
our
community,
business.
of our business.
Yeah.
So would you
Yes.
agree that you've achieved that?
I'd say the doctorate, but I'll settle with master's.
Exactly. Exactly. Right. So to be a on the top of your field as a community manager, it is the PCAM, the Community Association
Or
Institute.
in the industry, right? Because you're an industry expert that does reserve studies with the credential.
I'm not a manager, but I had that credential just because I thought it was important.
I gotcha.
And then you have an RS credential, right?
The reserve specialist.
And that's a national credential.
Yes, by the Community Associations Institute.
Okay,
Excellent.
so this statute that we're talking about is actually it's going to be an order onto the FCC. So the FCC already is in control of the satellite dishes in our communities, and now it's going to be the ham radio antennas. And it's a little bit controversial, right? Because this is prohibiting associations from having restrictions that preclude ham radio, fail to reasonably accommodate ham radio, or doesn't constitute the minimum practicable restriction on ham radio use. That's what the words of the statute say.
Yeah, it's a tough read.
It is a tough read.
So few words.
It's broad, and so like these great laws that are always being made, it's once they're put into place, then it's all these little details and how the facts actually apply to the law where we get controversy.
Well, like the great law now where you can put up your clotheslines, right? Didn't I hear something like rumor on the street that maybe
in backyards.
Backyards.
That was
Now
passed.
you can air out your laundry and hang it up on your clotheslines in your community associations,
I think
right?
it's a solar clothes dryer, Jonathan.
Solar clothes dryer.
Yeah, well, it's an environmentally friendly, right? They want to try to reduce energy use. So,
Yes.
Okay, Vianna.
So, Bob, do you think there's going to be any impact on property values with the passage of this new legislation?
We think there could be. Ham radio masts or towers usually need guy wires, as well as this feed line I talked about earlier to send the signal to the antenna. So we're afraid that with the association's boards not being able to enforce their CCNRs, that we're going to see a series of antennas and masts going up in communities all around the country that could impact property values. And with the housing market coming out of a serious decline, as we all know, and with our housing being usually the largest expense, most of us are going to make in our lifetime, to have, such a small niche of a hobby to impact our main investment is really serious, and we do think it will impact property values.
Well, how about sort of the slippery slope theory, right?
Mm-hmm.
That is, they put this federal law and regulation into place, and there's not a lot of ham radio operators. But once you get this law into place, now it's going to proliferate, right? So then you get a lot of ham radio operators. This is sort of, we have a new turf law, right? So with the new turf law, it says you can't prohibit
AB
turf.
349, right? Did I get the numbers right?
You did. And so with that, the idea is that, oh my gosh, slippery slope, a lot of owners are going to install the turf. So why don't we adopt some rules to get some reasonable restrictions? So maybe associations can do that with ham radio.
Yeah, and what's really crazy about this bill is that nowhere in it does it says if you're going to have a master tower in your yard and if you're going to impact property values and if you're really going to just tear up these private contracts, nowhere does it say that you have to use that master tower for the public good. So all of my ham radio friends who I love dearly are just chomping at the bit to be able to put up what they want as soon as this bill passes, even though many of them do no work with any public agency.
Bob Browning's call sign for ham radio.
K6RWB, Kilo 6, Romeo Whiskey Bravo, or Red, White, and Blue if I want to be patriotic.
How long have you had that?
I've been a licensed ham radio operator for over 20 years.
Oh, wow.
So general class license.
Well, what Community Association Ham Radio Day? This is kind of like your brainchild, right?
Well, my whole thing is I've written a white paper on behalf of CAI.
What's that? What's a white paper?
A white paper, it's kind of a position paper on what I've done is the pros and cons of the bill and kind of why can't we all get along. Community associations.
Now, you wrote this on behalf of Community Association Institute, the national international organization.
Yes.
And so we have Bob in studio here who wrote that on behalf of basically the Community Association Institute, which is worldwide.
I was asked to write some talking points, and I got carried away. So they turned it into a white paper, and it's available online at the Community Association's website. I'd be happy to send it to anybody. But the thesis of the paper is we should all get along. Ham radios should be allowed in community associations where they are reasonably needed, and boards should welcome that as needed, and that the ham radio hobby should not be using a sledgehammer to swat at a fly here. And that's really what this hobby is in the terms of community associations.
Yeah, okay, so you have listed different types of non-traditional associations and how this ham radio would be impacted. Can you go through those? Those are really interesting.
Well, when I started thinking about it, the bill doesn't say that you couldn't put a mast on a docominium, so that's where you own your private boat slip. What if you wanted to put a mast on that? You only own maybe 12 square feet of area and you put a mast on it. Campground associations, aviation associations, equestrian, commercial, and mixed use. So your dentist office might be able to have a ham radio antenna on it because the dentist is a ham.
Jump back. When you say campground associations, I immediately think of the resource that you would have if you had ham radio equipment in that area, we've had a bunch of fires, right?
You could bring
important
portable antenna and set it up whenever you need it and then take it down.
Absolutely. And you know what? And we drive up 50, they have all these giant cell phone towers that look like pine trees and blend in.
Crazy.
So, like you said, why can't everybody be friends? What do you think, Epstein? Ham radio is the future of community associations?
Well, I always think that there is a middle ground, and I see that Bob has some ideas about a middle ground, how we can make this legislation work in community associations. And typically when there are disputes nowadays, it is resolved through a middle ground. So, like I said before, I think associations can adopt rules, reasonable rules, that would be upheld in court.
Hey, Bob,
I
thanks
agree.
for joining us. And I guess you've got a lot of managers probably going, hey, Bob, can you get back to the office? And
Yeah, I'll be
finish?
there in about a half hour.
Have a great Saturday.
Okay, goodbye, listeners. We'll see you next week.